One of the questions that will always be asked throughout the centuries will be this specific question: what is my purpose on earth? There have been many iterations of this question that have followed as well. Questions like, what is my life calling? Why do I exist? And the question that I'll be going over, which is, why were we created? Have you ever thought that? Especially during challenging times like this last year, these types of questions, these existential questions were frequently asked. Why were we created in the first place, especially when the world is a place that seems to have suffering all around it? Why were we created in the first place, especially when we feel like, we lose the desire to live? Why were we created in the first place, especially when the answer isn't as obvious as we'd like it to be? This is obviously a deeper question that can take, hours-long conversations over a whole length of time, and really has been asked throughout the course of history. But I wanted to just provide you a thought or two to get you thinking about why you and I were created in the first place. In my humble opinion, a good place to start when thinking about this idea of being created beings is probably trying to take a look at the genesis of creation, or perhaps even beforehand. We clearly can't do any time traveling, but thankfully, what we have written in the scriptures, in the Genesis creation account, is an account of what the narrator of the book of Genesis writes regarding the beginning of human life as we know it. Take a look at what it says in Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28. It says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth.' And so God created man in his own image, and he created him in the image of God. He created them, male and female." You can honestly do an entire sermon series with these two verses because there's so much rich truth just jam-packed into them. But for this short teaching, I want to highlight something in this passage. There is an essence of plurality in the way that God talks about himself in these two verses. Or in other words, God does not refer to himself as just a single person individual or single person God, but rather a plural person's individual. Throughout the course of humanity, spelled out by the scriptures, we see time and time again the reality of who God is as a triune God. Right? Simply put, this means that God is three persons in one essence. Let me say that again, right? Simply put, God being a triune God, it means that God is three persons in one essence. God the Father, you have Jesus Christ the Son, and the Holy Spirit. They are three distinct persons, but they share the same essence. God as Trinity is extremely significant in understanding one of the answers and one of the responses as to why we were created. You see, if God existed in three distinct persons even before time began, before he created the universe, before he created humanity, we can claim that God existed in community with himself. We can say that it was a perfect, loving community. For eternity, God the Father has been loving his Son and the Spirit, and all of them loving one another in perfect unity and perfect harmony. Loving one another is not abnormal for God, and it is in essence who he is. Perhaps you've heard the idea that God is love, which comes from 1 John chapter 4, verses 7 through 8. Out of this love, God creates. Eternally, God has been loving his Son and the Spirit so that out of that love, he creates us in order to love us and so that we can love him. I know that answer might seem corny, but man, it is so relieving and so liberating, even for me to hear. This reality tells me that I don't have to strive for any of the things that the world labels as your essential purpose for life. Sure, scoring top of your class or, getting your dream job can still be things you can strive for because, they're good things to pursue. But they no longer have to be the sole reason as to why you were created. You were created to love God. You were created to experience the love of God. And these different things, right, like pursuing your dream job or scoring, top of your class, they can be conduits in which we experience the love of God and express the love that we have back towards God. There is one thing to note with all of this. Unfortunately, there are things in this world that will block, that will suppress, that will reject or deny, cloud, minimize, or entirely just remove the love of God that God pours out to us on the daily. In a broad stroke term, in our Christian faith, we call this sin. And this is why the gospel of Jesus Christ is so significant. The gospel of Christ tells us that Jesus died on the cross for the very sin that separates or blocks us from experiencing the love of God. And through Christ, we can very well experience that love to the fullest. In essence, the life, death, burial, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ is God's redemption plan to bring things back to how He originally planned it to be. For His creation to experience His love to the fullest, and for His creation to love Him back with the fullest. Through Jesus Christ, that possibility is wide open. So friends, you and I were created to experience and enjoy the love of God, and my hope is that you can experience that every single day and find the things in life that will point you to Jesus Christ and the reason to why you were created.